chose this sculpture. So Deb Braver contacted me maybe in April and said, we're putting this lecture series together. You want to talk about something? I said, sure. And I was at that time preparing to go to Philadelphia. We have a member organization called the Friends of the Haggerty Museum of Art. Any friends here? Okay, we can fix that. But so we were doing a trip to Philadelphia because I wanted to go there to see the Barnes, and I was going to see the Rodin Museum that I knew. And I don't consider myself a Rodin expert. I'm not here to present myself in that way. But I thought, well, I'm going to go get immersed in this. That'd be kind of cool because I know there's a connection with this work, which we'll be discussing tonight. So that is kind of why I'm here tonight. I can share my impressions from the Rodin Museum in Philly. Note that the artist who created this work is speaking on September 6th. Is that at the Milwaukee Art Museum? So I'm going to kind of share, I'm going to tell you a story tonight of how the work came to be. She's going to be the one who can talk nitty-gritty details, specifics, technique, all of that. So I would really encourage you to go ahead and go to that. So here's our guide. Here's who we're talking about. How many of you seen this in person? You've seen it. Let me ask you, what is going on with this sculpture? What's going on in this sculpture? What's going on here?
You tell me.
What's that?
You tell me.
I'm going to tell you a story about it, but I want to know what you see.
Probably a, what's the word? Injured human being.
Injured human being. What do you see that makes you say that?
Well, you know, his traditional parts are kind of maimed or
right.
deformed.
Yeah. Kind of, you can see, here's if you're referring to this. By the way, these are three different, this is not the easiest thing in the world to photograph, FYI. So this is on the left, it shows you the full sculpture and its crate being installed. This is a photograph of the back that I took about 2 weeks ago. And then this is the detail that I found in the hand. So you're saying that because you can tell it's a figure, we can tell that, but you're sensing some distortions of trauma, maybe in here and here.
Kind of been rearranged a little bit.
Rearranged. Keep that up. Any other? What else is going on? What else can we find?
Feels uncomfortable.
What do you see here that makes you say that?
I don't know, the posture, the way that the figure's standing.
Right.
I can't really see the arms. I think it's on the arms. Are they up against the chest?
Yeah, we'll see a little bit more of that in a minute. So you're again kind of going back to the posture and the fact that we can tell it's a human, but it looks like this person is uncomfortable. So it almost kind of speaks to what you were saying about trauma, uncomfortable, discomfort. Yeah. But you're getting expressiveness out of this. I mean, it seems like it's kind of impacting you. You're not saying, oh, what is this? You're saying there's something powerful happening here. Is that safe to say? Yes?
And it's a minor and obvious point, but it appears to be human scale. I would not raise my hand saying that I had seen it, because I have not.
Yeah.
Where in the road is it?
I think this is just really close, right kind of catty corner, isn't it?
Yeah. Right
Next
across
block.
the street.
Yeah, we're going to walk over there. Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
embarrassed that
It's
I-
about human scale.
It is. So there is I looked at the background and I kind of sensed that.
Yeah.
So there is a relatedness, not only
Yeah.
the shape to it, but the size of it.
So you're saying the scale of it gives you kind of a sense of a human scale, and what does that do anything for you? Does that resonate?
Well, it creates some empathy, empathetic feelings toward
Yeah,
this.
I agree. Yes?
The first word that comes to mind for me is movement.
Movement.
I mean, the figure is not extraordinarily well defined. It's got a lot of texture, so the eye moves around it. And it seems to be in transition.
Nice. In transition, what do you see that makes you say that? It's the movement, presumably. I'm not here to quiz you, but I want to get at some of these.
The body, the position of the legs, the ambiguity of the form of the arms and the legs. It's all hard to specify where it is.
Movement in process, kind of. Yes. Okay.
I also get a sense that there's part of this body that's kind of emerging out of this monkey-pack kind of forms. I mean, like the face is quite well defined, as is the hand, but everything around it seems kind of like blobby or...
The rest of the body's not as well defined. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that, and I agree. So this probably doesn't get a lot of love when you first see the image of it, right? Because it's not like, oh, how pretty. But when I went to walk up to it, and you'll find it's got big presence to it. It's very powerful, and I will talk about some story behind that. So the story of our sculpture, this is it as well. This is the artist Liz Glynn. This is a plaster cast of our sculpture, and here it is as well. So I'm going to talk to you about how this came to be. Liz Glynn herself was born in Boston and lives in Los Angeles right now. So she is actually speaking. I mentioned that already. Okay, she goes here. So our story. We are standing here in 2018 about a sculpture that's down the street, but our story begins over a century ago with Auguste Rodin. Here are two of his most well-known pieces, The Finger, The Kiss. Are you familiar with, how many of you are familiar with this work? There's a reason for that. When he was alive, he was obviously a French sculptor, very into having his work distributed. He actually, his working process would begin by he would make clay models. So he was a sculptor of clay, and then they would be cast. He would make plaster casts, and then they would be turned into bronze sculptures eventually. But he was all about making lots of them. He actually authorized 300 versions of The Finger while he was alive alone. So there's a lot of them out there. And you think about the title of this, The Myth of Singularity. That is from Liz. That is from Liz Glynn. It's not from me. But already start thinking, because this work is actually quite conceptual as well. So we all think about art objects as we come upon them, and I am all about the power of the object, but you think if this is the only one in the world that's precious, that is a myth that she is dealing with right now, and thinking about the concept of what is originality, and is there really a single thing? So one of his best known works, and you will note the Burghers in this title, is the same, there's the same word in her title. One of his best known works is this one, and the scale of these figures are 6.5 feet tall. They are in a city called Calais in France, which is on the English Channel, and this is a Rodin piece that's one of his best known. So it tells the story of the Porton of Calais, which was held siege by the King of England in the 14th century during the 100 Years' War. So they got to the point where they were starving, they were all about to die, and he said, okay, if you can get 6 of your leaders from your community to come and sacrifice themselves to me, wearing nooses and bringing the key to the city, I will save your entire town. And so there was the leader of the town, who's depicted here, this guy. But eventually there were 6 of the people, 6 of these burghers of Calais, businessmen, who showed up at the gate and said, okay, we are going to sacrifice our lives so we can save our town. And that is what he's depicting here. And the interesting thing is, well, a couple of things, they didn't die because the queen said, I'm pregnant, and if you do this, it's bad luck for the baby, so they were spared. So we have our ways, you know. So, but this commission, when it was made in the 19th century, there's a lot, you can imagine how this went. So there were 2 artists before him who thought about doing this, didn't wind up doing it. He comes along, and the approach here had always been that this leader, this guy here, had been considered, he was the one who made all this happen. Rodin made a number of different changes, because you can also imagine, think about heroic sculptures. If there was somebody who had saved Milwaukee from somebody, they would probably be like this. That's not what's happening here. What's happening here is he chose to show all 6 of them, to depict all 6 of them. He shows them not heroically, not even relieved when they find out they're not going to die. He shows them grappling with the fact that they are about to die. And not only that, but they are not all together. They are each in their own experience of what's about to happen to them. It's an incredibly expressive work. He wanted this, when it was first made, they wanted to be up on a high pedestal. He said, no, I want it down low. So if you look, those are cars behind it. This is in this town of Calais, it's the original one back here, because he wanted you as a viewer to come up to it and experience that incredible expressiveness. And the surface of these sculptures is a big part of that. Again, these are all sculpted in clay, plaster molds, and then cast in bronze. So this is the original. These are also originals, and you can see where they are. And so are these. This is the one that I saw. This is outside the Philadelphia Museum, and this is kind of nice because it shows you the behind and kind of the sense of motion, getting back to what you were talking about in these. Pasadena, just make a note of that, that is near Los Angeles. And so are these. You may have seen this in the Met. They're all considered originals. In fact, There are 12 of them that are included in all of these various places. When Rodin, well, I mentioned he authorized 300 casts of the thinker while he was alive. When he died, he gave his entire studio and its contents to the French government, and they authorized 12 versions that are considered original of this piece, and so that is why these are all considered as original as the first one. The Musée Rodin is the place that has the authority to determine if it's appropriate or not, if it's original. So, again, the myth of singularity. We think there's this one monumental sculpture, it's monumental, it's not the only one. Rodin was up to other things too. So, this is another thing I saw in Philadelphia. What strikes you here? Maybe I'll just say a word about his technique. I already mentioned that he was an amazing clay sculptor. He was known for changing the scale of his works when they were cast. He worked with a guy who invented something called a pantogram, which is kind of like the contemporary of a 3D printer. It was kind of like it would expand the whole thing and keep the proportions as you did it. So he worked with an extensive studio, so he was known for changing scale. So that's one thing happening here. Small on the left, didn't have the dimensions on the right, but it's bigger than life size, so it's tough. What else strikes you about this? Anything? What's the difference between this guy, and this guy? He would often make multiple casts from his clay sculpture and then use the same plaster and just rotate it. So there'd be one here, there'd be one here, there'd be one here. And that's why they have this kind of powerful sense of solidity, because they are the same thing. Some of the, that one, yeah, that's right, because the first one, it's the left arm, goes over here, goes over here. So it's a multiple of the same figure, but it doesn't read that way immediately, doesn't it? So again, myth of singularity. He's reusing all these casts from an original, and remember that form because you're going to see it in a minute. Other cool things he did, this is kind of the same idea. There's an original clay, beautiful torso on the left. He would make casts, as I mentioned, and just do all kinds of things with them. And in this case, do you see the similarity here and here? He cast this and added legs and the arms here, and this is the same torso. So he is just kind of thinking about his studio as having all of these different things in it that he could use to combine and put things together in all kinds of interesting ways. Does that make sense? Myth of singularity. It's not sprung from the mind of the genius, it's its own thing. It's got an inventory in the studio, he's doing interesting things with it. It's hard to break these myths we have. And it gets even cooler. So these are plaster casts. What you may have heard of Camille Claudel, who was a well-known sculptor. She studied with him, became his lover. This is one of the first portraits that he made of her. He was a remarkable drawer. He drew incessantly and beautifully. And that's not surprising, perhaps, when you see his work, how expressive it is with the line. So he began doing portraits of her. One of the first ones, you can tell she's quite young here. Plaster of her, and then that hand is from one of the guys in the Burghers of Calais. Pierre de Wisant was one of the Burghers. So again, he had a plaster cast just of the hand laying around, and that's what you see on the right here. If you were going to his studio at this point in time, you would see a bunch of plaster cast of arms all laying around, and he just would put them together. And this was pretty radical and very modern to be thinking about creating sculpture in this way, to be really, he certainly wasn't worried about what the Academy thought of him. He's actually trained in a commercial studio, so he was not particularly bound to worrying about all that stuff. But he was not, this was very innovative, very interesting. So bringing parts together. So enter Liz Glynn, who's our current artist that we're talking about. We've moved forward a century now, more than a century. And more myth of singularity is that the sculpture that we have outside was one of 8 that was on view at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. And what you see here is it says the Renwick Pavilion. It's one of the pavilions. So it's an R. And I will give you a little bit of a close-up. So here's our guy over here. There's one arm there. Here he is again, and here he is again. So in fact, your question about the arm, there's one that's like this, and then one that's way down here like this, and I'll tell you about that in just a moment as well. So these were installed, there's 8 sculptures. They were installed both in 4 different places. Have you been to LA County Museum of Art? Anybody? So you know they have a sculpture garden. And so these were, some of those were in theirs. There was one that was in a gallery, but they were all over, and this was in the fall of 2015 that this installation was there, and it was called The Myth of Singularity. That's what the exhibition was called. You can see how this is all coming together. But there's more. So LACMA, as we shall call it from here on, has a good collection of Rodin sculptures. It's got a lot of them. A lot of them came, you can see the credit line here, the Cantor Foundation, which collected many, many of those, and they gave significant gifts of sculpture to a number of museums, including the LA County Museum of Art. A number of these sculptures, this is one of them, and by the way, this guy is from the Burghers of Calais. So this is a individual sculpture of one of those figures that you can see was cast in 1987. So one thing about their pieces, they're installed, a lot of them in this garden, they're big, but they were cast long after the artist's death by some different people, and I will tell you about that in a moment. Maybe I'll just tell you now. So Liz Glynn came to LACMA, and we love it when this happens because she's an artist who comes and she says, I want to learn about your collection and do some stuff with it. And that's fabulous because that's what you want. Because really, all art is contemporary. If it's in my museum right now, it's down the street, it's contemporary because you're looking at it in 2018. It could be from, very historic, but, when you can have an artist come breathe life into your collection and have a really creative response to it, that's good stuff. And so I think she did a series, she studied in depth Rodin, his processes, materials, his techniques, all the stuff we just talked about, which she apparently wasn't familiar with before she came there. Did a few other things with Richard Serra, I want to say, but she was all about getting at this collection and creating a response to it and really understanding it. So she came and saw these sculptures, and one of her responses, which I think is true when you look at these images, is how, I can loop back to see the texture. Am I going to have to go back too far? You can kind of see here. So one of the things that you picked up on is how there's just dynamic texture on the surface of these sculptures. It's expressive, it's emotive. You can see it here even. They're not dull, they're not flat, except these castings at LACMA kind of are. You can see the difference there in this one. So I think that is something that she picked up on, was wanting to bring that life back that you were talking about, and really wanting to, also there's a real conceptual bent to these, wanting to recreate Rodin's practices in 2015. Actually have it in 2013, which I'll say more about. Okay, so here's one of their LACMA sculptures, and here's what Liz Glynn was doing. And this was, you can see his foot, same sculpture there. So she convinced the conservation department to do this test, to try it on this one foot. She tried it on the foot, and she, go to these next ones, brushed 3 layers of silicone rubber on them and created impressions of this, just of the foot. She didn't do the whole sculpture. So went ahead and did that. You see the rubber silicone there, you see the cloth there that is kind of reinforcing like a bandage. She's applying it with the idea that when it pulls off easily, and that was part of the conversation with the conservators who were like, you want what? They've been outside for 40 years, but silicone peels off very easily. I have a slide later where you can see that. It also captures every detail of the surface, and so it can be cast. You can cast it, which is to say you can pour plaster into it, you can put clay into it, you can put wax into it. She's creating an impression, she's creating a mold of different parts. Here's another one. Recognize this shape? Here's the guy with the arm. They have this. Again, this one was cast 1969. So she looks at this and decides to capture the face. And this part of the process was done just her and the conservators. But again, just this idea of isolating a part of it, creating an impression, creating a mold that can be cast later. Here's another one, and this is a really great piece. So Rodin got the commission to do a monument to Balzac shortly after he died. And he barely got the commission. He got it. He worked on it for 7 years. And that happened because he read all of Balzac. He went to Balzac's hometown and met people who looked like him and drew them. He got a tailor to make the same kind of clothes he wore. He made it this penetrating psychological portrait of this really very important figure. So it wasn't about making it look like him, it was about making it feel like him. So LACMA has a casting of that from 1967. Nothing is sacred, here we are, casting his face, and those are holes that are put in the mold to help with the casting process later, if you're wondering what those blue things are. So you get the idea here. The point is they're all Rodin sculptures at LACMA, she's finding different parts of them and casting fragments of them. Why? Here's Balzac again, that just shows you when it's peeling it off, so you can see very detailed mold here and how easily it comes off. So she winds up with this inventory of casts, essentially, and decides that it's going to be a performance. And so what you see here is the title of the performance that she did in January of 2013. You can tell we're in Los Angeles because that is in January. So it's a beautiful day, but she wanted to, so the aspect of her work that was performative was getting eight or 10 other sculptors, depending on, ask her when she comes, but she had other assistants helping her to create plaster casts from these molds that she had made. And she didn't go back to her studio and did it, she went to this area at LACMA and did it publicly, so people could see the process, is the point. So we are opening up the process, we are making the process very present and very transparent. So these are all plaster castings that you see here. And you know plaster, which is just the plaster powder you mix with water and you just smack it on. Very, very long-standing method of making sculpture. She must have done some clay molds as well, because that's what this looks like, and I found this photograph. So the other thing you could do, you could either just cast the rubber mold in plaster as it is, or you can put clay into it and create those impressions that way. So I believe she did both, but we can ask her that when she comes. Here's some other examples. You can just see that it was a public community gathering of just plastering all these things. And so what she would do is take fragments from sculpture A, sculpture B, take a face from here, take a leg from here, take a belly from here, combine them in a new sculpture. And she would do that with these plaster masks on an armature, which is what it's called in the sculptural world. And then you would just have a new piece that was created from parts from different sculptures. That, as we have seen, may or may not come together. Just another fun piece of people working in the garden. And here's our guy. We're back to this slide of her in the studio and the plaster cast here. She, so clearly this is, face from somebody, arm from somebody else, legs from somebody else. That's why they don't look like they go together, right? Because they're from different sculptures, and she is. That's kind of her point, is to make visible this recombination of different parts. She talks about this arm as saying that it wasn't supposed to be that long, but it actually was not wired properly to the what do you call it, the structure? The armature, thank you. And it slipped, and she decided to keep that. I think there's two things going on there. One is the element of chance, which a lot of times artists like to capture. Also, it's just part of the process of making. This happened while I was making this, and so I'm capturing it now. It's part of the piece. So, we are back to our friend here, and that is kind of the story of how it was created. She, so after she made the plaster cast 2 days in January 2013, had him made at a foundry to cast in bronze. And typically, she talks about the fact that often you can just drop it off and say, here, make my sculpture and come back. But they made, from the plaster cast, they wound up making wax positives. And when she went back and saw those, she wasn't satisfied because they didn't capture all the messiness of the plaster. She loved the plaster, loved even like the rope sticking to it, the gestural, the kind of messy stuff of it. So she had to go back and kind of work on those wax positives that came from these plasts for a couple months to get back to that texture, to get back to that sense of motion and expressiveness on the surface. That was really important to her. So it took a lot longer than she thought it was going to. She also talks about the patina, because the color that's on these sculptures is applied by the artist. And Rodin was known for a 3-layer process of different colors of green. I think it started with light, then dark, and you had that wrong, but no, there were 3 layers. And she was very faithful to that process and did that here as well. And she actually makes a little snarky comment that at LACMA, we already have talked about, she's not thrilled with these recent castings that don't capture the expressiveness of the process. They worked with the son of the man who worked with Rodin. He didn't use the same 3-layer patina process, and she said they actually put green into the wax to make it look green. So it was kind of just like, so therefore, are they really Rodin's? So that is our story. There we are back with this very expressive face, and I think, I guess I'll open it up to you. What are your thoughts about that? Now that you know the story behind it.